Welcome to a talk on the most important cycle of your life. My name is Jeff Baugher. I believe that one of astrology's highest uses is to be able to help individuals remember, and not just what the journey is, but where they are in the process, where they are in that journey, which step, which phase, which part of it that they're going through. And that with that awareness, with that perspective, it gives the person, it gives the individual a context to understand what's happening and also to make better, more conscious decisions about what they're going to do next. So one of the things that happened to me as I studied more astrology and I started giving consults, doing charts, and moved beyond just interpreting the natal chart and started to get into timing and cycles. And at some point, what began to happen was I had so much information that it became confusing. That it was like, okay, I've got instead of one thing to look at, I've got 5 things to look at. I remember getting printouts. This is many years ago of transits over a certain period of time. I do transits for a month, and it would be a stack of paper. And at some point, when you're trying to collect information and understand things, a certain amount of information is really helpful. But beyond a certain point, more information actually becomes less helpful. More information becomes less information, because then there's so many things to consider that it can actually be confusing. Especially if some of these different systems are providing data that don't line up. One saying one thing and the other one saying the opposite, and they're happening around the same time. So there's a problem here. There was a problem here for me, and the thought that I had was, wouldn't it be nice if there was one major overarching cycle that would provide a framework to understand everything that was going on. One major system or way of thinking about the person's life and the person's journey through life, into which everything else could be plugged. And this system would have to be so fundamental that it would cover the main things in a person's life. And I also felt like it would be important that this cycle include not just what was happening out in the world, but also what was happening on an inner level with the individual. I've had so many clients come to me and ask me the question, tell me what's going to happen. And I think what they're saying is that what events are going to occur in their life. And I like to frame the astrological discussion a little differently, because from the what's going to happen, if you're not careful, it can put a person in a passive recipient of what's happening in the universe. It can put you in a victim place. My belief is that there's a very powerful relationship between what's happening on the inside, inner events, inner decisions, inner feelings, inner beliefs, and what happens externally in a person's life, the actual physical, real-world events. That in fact, those inner events, that inner world is what creates the outer world, that the two are linked together. And the outer world affects what happens in the inner world. That it's important to consider both of those if you're going to have a more whole approach to a person's life. So with that idea in mind, I began to focus on 2 points in the chart, 2 of the primary points, the sun and the moon, 2 lights. The sun representing the conscious part, the moon, the subconscious, the sun, the outer, the moon, the inner. And then the interplay between those two. And combined, the sun-moon cycle that happens every 29 and a half days with secondary progressions in a person's horoscope, which converts it from a day to a year, and came up with this 29 and a half year cycle horoscope. That if you know what 29 and a half year cycle they're in and what phase of that cycle that they're in, that gives a backdrop or a framework in which everything else that's happening astrologically in the horoscope that relates to timing can be plugged into. It's in a way, it simplifies things. It's answering that big question again before you drop down into the details of all the different transits and all the different factors. So there are two keys with this cycle. The first key is which sign of the zodiac does the sun-moon cycle begin with? Whatever that sign is, that sign will suggest themes and issues that the person is going to be working through over the course of the entire cycle. So the sign of the new moon, the sign of the progressed new moon, that's the theme. The second part, the second significant thing is that the cycle itself is split up into 8 time segments or 8 phases. In the monthly cycle, each phase lasting 3.5 to 4 days. In the 29 and a half year cycle, each phase lasting 3.5 to 4 years. And that as a person moves through these phases, there's a process of growth that happens that's very well defined. And the process includes both the inner and the outer. It's not just measuring what's happening on the inside, it's not just measuring what's happening on the outside, it's actually those two blend together. The 8 phases are in sequence: the new phase, then the crescent, then the first quarter, then the gibbous, then the full, the disseminating, the third quarter, and the balsamic. The growth process that happens is in the new phase. There's a vision for what's to be accomplished. A goal usually comes out of the new phase. What do I want to have happen? What new form or structure am I wanting to create in my life? Crescent phase, pulling together all the resources that are required to accomplish that goal. It can be money, it could be materials, it could be information, it could be contacts with other people. First quarter phase is when the action really starts. The person breaks away from the past. It's the most active phase of the entire cycle. They step out there and moving towards something that's new, or at least new for them. The gibbous phase, now that they're into pushing towards their goal, they've learned some things about what they're doing that they could not have known without actually doing it, without actually stepping into it. So in the gibbous phase, they start to make adjustments to the original goal based on what's happening. And at the full phase, halfway through the cycle, you've spent the first 4 phases, the first half of the cycle, putting out there what you want to happen. At the full phase, now the results come. So this is the realization. Is it working? Is it not working? This is a lot of ahas happen in the full phase. The disseminating phase, this is more about sharing perspectives, so you can more easily understand what has accomplished or what's failed. The third quarter phase, taking responsibility for the goal and actually manifesting that goal and integrating whatever it's been created into something larger, above and beyond the person's individual life. And then the balsamic phase is really about letting go of what's happened. I think of it as a giveaway, becoming quiet and on an internal level, focusing on what is the journey meant internally, what's going to be left behind, and what's going to be carried forward. The seed for the next cycle then starts to develop in that balsamic phase. So the first half of the cycle, new to full, trying to create some new form or structure. The second half of the cycle is integrating that form or structure into the world and or understanding the significance of what's been created. So for example, if I use the example of a mountain climbing expedition, working through these 8 phases, and this could be in the 29.5 day cycle or the 29.5 year cycle, either one. In the new phase, so the mountain climbing expedition doesn't begin when you take your first step on the mountain. There's first deciding, well, which mountain am I going to climb? And who am I going to do it with? And when do I want to do it? So there's a lot of decisions around the vision or the goal. Then the crescent phase comes. And again, haven't reached the mountain yet. You gotta buy your climbing equipment, maybe some shoes and backpacks. And maybe there's a necessity to learn some things or do some research to find out more about the mountain that's being climbed and what's going to be required. So this is getting all preparation. Maybe there's buying plane tickets to be able to fly to where the mountain is. Getting all this stuff lined up. Then in the first quarter phase, you actually get on the plane, you're off, and reach the mountain, and you start putting one foot in front of the next one. So the first quarter phase is where the rubber meets the road. The action really starts to happen. Up to that point, it's all been discussion and preparation. So you're working your way up the mountain, you get halfway up, and at that point, maybe the original goal was to climb the mountain in 4 days. And after a day or two of climbing, you realize, this is a little harder than I thought it was going to be. It's more strenuous. I think I need to do this in 6 days. So I'm going to change. I'm going to modify the original goal and do this and give myself more time so I can do it in a way that's comfortable. So adjusting the original goal based on the circumstances and based on feedback from what's happening. Finally, you get to the top of the mountain. This is like the full phase. You're standing there, you turn around, you look back, and you can see not just where you are, but where you climbed, your starting point. There's this vista, this perspective of the self and what you've accomplished, and an awareness about how maybe you're different in some way, and something about what you're capable of, what you aspire to. It's interesting, I've read about a lot of the astronauts who've gone into space, and many of them have said that when they're up in space and they were able from that perspective to look back at the Earth, that they had just a realization or an awareness about themselves and about life and about God that just totally changed them forever. So that's this full phase effect, the big aha. And then the disseminating phase is, okay, so there I am, and now with the people that I'm mountain climbing with, we start sharing and talking about what does it mean to me, what does it mean to you, and they may share something and gives me more ideas about the significance, and also me sharing with them. So the group starts to climb back down the mountain, and the hardest part, going up the mountain is accomplished, and now it's about going back down and sharing and what does this mean. And as you're working your way down the mountain, you reach the third quarter phase, and it's like, it'd be nice to just helicopter off here and go back to home, but no, you got to finish the journey. You got to take it back down. And so the last part of going down the mountain, and you finish the mountain climb, and that's the third quarter phase. You've actually successfully manifested what the goal that was envisioned back in the new phase. Now, you might think, well, the journey's over, but actually the journey isn't over. You still got to get from the bottom of the mountain back home. So this is like some rides in a car and a plane ride and finally back home. And so during that last part, which I would compare to the balsamic phase, you're not actively involved in the mountain climbing. You're actually internally processing what that experience was like, not just intellectually, but also emotionally and maybe spiritually. That what did it mean, and what did you gain from going up the mountain, and what is it there to carry forward from that experience, and what is it to be let go of? Maybe there were some parts of yourself or ideas about the self that really don't fit anymore. And that balsamic phase, that introspective part, it's a chance, it's an opportunity to let go of what's been outlived, what's outlived its usefulness. And in that being quiet and letting go and clearing out, what happens in the balsamic phase, it's not that there's a lot of stuff happening on the outside, but internally, in that empty space, the seed starts to form for what the theme is going to be for the next cycle. So that's an example, a quick example of how this 8-phase cycle works. So what I'm saying is that over the course of a lifetime, that each person is going to metaphorically climb 3 mountains of experience. That there's going to be 3 very distinct periods if you live a normal lifespan, each one having a single theme, and each one having 8 distinct phases that involve both the inner world, the inner experience, and the outer world and the outer experience. Now, there's one thing that's interesting about this, or maybe peculiar about this, and that is if a person's born exactly at the new moon, the sun and moon conjunction, then I know that age 29 and a half, their first cycle of experience is going to close, and a new 29 and a half year cycle is going to begin. But for 99% of us, we're not born exactly at the new moon. We're born part of the way into this sun-moon cycle. So wherever we're born in that cycle, we go a number of years until that first cycle completes, and then from that point, every 29 and a half years, we have a new cycle. So if someone tells me how old they are, I really don't know where they are in their cycle. It just depends. This is one of these where you have to talk with somebody, or you have to know secondary progressions and moon phases to be able to know where a person is in the cycle. And it's also interesting that each one of these, there's going to be these 3 major themes in the person's life based on wherever the progressed sun, moon, whatever sign of the zodiac that occurs in. So this is giving us at this overarching backdrop to understand what is the large flow of an individual's life and where are they in that flow. So what I'd like to do next is I'm going to use 2 examples of famous people and go through their 29 and a half year cycles, and I'm not going to spend much time on the natal chart. I mean, that's another discussion. So what we're going to first start with is the horoscope of Christopher Reeve. I'd like to begin with a little biographical information about Christopher Reeve. He was an American actor, a director, a producer, and a writer. He did over 150 plays, 55 movies. He's best known for his film portrayal of Superman in 4 films. This is between 1978 and 1987. In 1995, he became a quadriplegic as a result of an equestrian accident and was in a wheelchair from that point until his death. He became a spokesperson for disabled people and for stem cell research and died in October 2004. So here's a little deeper level of data about him. Born in New York City, his father was a writer and mother was a journalist. He attended Cornell University and then began studying at the Juilliard Drama School. And he was actually best friends with Robin Williams. His first big break as an actor was in 1976 when he co-starred opposite Katharine Hepburn in a Broadway play. He continued on stage, soap operas, a small part in a movie, and then as a relatively unknown actor, he was cast in the role of Superman in 1978, and which had enormous success, and there were 3 sequels. I think those 4 movies made like $300 million. It's interesting that he somewhat disdained roles that were just totally action-oriented. And part of what he did in the Superman was he was able to successfully split the Superman and the Clark Kent roles into 2 completely different characters, and in his own way, redefining the character of Superman. After he was paralyzed in 95, he was confined to a wheelchair and, for the most part, unable to breathe without unless he had a mechanical respirator. He fought depression, and his wife Dana helped pull him through that period. He mostly retired from production of films and focused on rehab therapy. He opened a paralysis resource center that taught people how to live. People who are paralyzed how to live independently. Created the Child Paralysis Foundation and funded research and worked with people that were disabled. And I think his foundation eventually generated over $60 million in grants. So just to touch on his chart, Christopher Reeve, September 25th, 1952, New York, New York, 3:12 a.m. And I'm noticing he's got Sun in the sign of Libra, Moon in the sign of Sagittarius, and Leo rising. So this is someone, Sun in Libra, that part of their agenda. It's about creating balance, being the balancer, the harmonizer, and wanting to bring something that's bring beauty to the world, and to get along. The Moon in Sagittarius this is the explorer. This is the emotional need to boldly go where he's never gone before. And then the rising sign, the mass, of course, Leo, which is the performer. It's the attention seeker. It's the person who really wants to be recognized for their gifts and talents. So so he's born in the crescent phase of the moon. It's fairly early in one of these 29.5-year cycles. And what's interesting is, even though his sun is in the sign of Libra at birth, the new moon before he was born was in the sign of Virgo. So he came in on a Virgo cycle. He came in part of the way through a Virgo cycle. So we're thinking that probably Virgo themes are going to be very important, are going to be dominant in the first 20-something years of his life. And I'm thinking the sign of Virgo is about improving the self. Virgo is the sign that can recognize the difference between the reality and the ideal, and do something to close that distance. So improving the self by perfecting his craft, being of service. Really, this is about this is work on yourself until you're good, and until you're acceptable, until you're considered valuable. And then the second cycle is in the sign of Libra, and you think Libra is about creating balance and harmony and beauty through artistry and relationship. So those are the two. His life was shortened, so he basically went on 2 mountain climbing expeditions in terms of life journey. So what I'd like to do is actually drop into some of the high points, or some of the important phases as he worked his way through these 2 mountain experiences. So he entered the first quarter phase in 1954, and by late 55, age 3, he had moved in with his mother. And what happened to his father, who worked in academia and had liberal ideals, he became branded as a communist. His father became branded as a communist. So you think about the early 1950s and what was going on. And then his parents divorced. His father remarries, and then eventually he's got 3 half siblings on the father's side of the family. Gibbous phase, and gets to age 5, and basically he spent his childhood vying for his father's attention and wanting to outshine his half siblings. Then his mother remarries. It's interesting, his comment about that period was that his parents, and this is a quote, that they had a tendency to use me like a chess piece, unquote. So think about this Libran who's wanting peace, and he's got Leo rising, who's craving attention big time and really pulled in several different directions. By age 8, this first cycle reaches the full phase, and what's happening is, this is Reeves' quote, he said, "Much of my time and energy went into trying to be as perfect as possible. I thought that this would set me apart from all my half-brothers and step-brothers who became a part of my life when my mother and father both remarried." So I want you to catch that, trying to be as perfect as possible. He's in a Virgo cycle. He doesn't have any planets in his chart in Virgo, but his approach, his idea here, when he reaches the full phase, it's like, okay, here's the realization that comes in this Virgo cycle. It's like, my ticket to getting the attention that I so desperately need is, I'm just going to have to be as perfect as possible. And so he was sent to a private school, and he ended up excelling in academics and also in sports, and he became avid about the theater. And these early successes, and especially with the theater, what he thought was that he said, quote, "This is what set me up for life." So this is the aha of the full phase of the Virgo cycle. By age 15, he moved into the third quarter phase, and both of the second marriages of his parents began to collapse, and just the disunity of the two spliced together families was really hard on him, and he was quoted as saying that came to the conclusion that marriage was a sham. And then the balsamic phase kicks in. This is around age 19. So this is the last phase of this Virgo cycle that he started out with. And so the experiences of this cycle are starting to wind down, and there's a transition coming. And what happens towards the end of the balsamic phase is, in 1975, he actually gets an audition for this Broadway play with Katharine Hepburn. That there's this new possibility rolling in, and it may be that the fruits of his Virgonian approach to things are going to start paying off here. And then in spring of 1976, he starts the new phase. He ends the Virgo cycle and begins the Libra cycle. So this is big. This is a big transition point in his life. He's ended one mountain climb, and now he's headed on the next. He's headed up the Libra. The Libra journey has begun. And if you think about the transition between the signs of Virgo and Libra, why do we do Virgo? Why would we work on ourselves and use that critical mind and seeing the flaws? It's so that we can get better and improve ourselves and be more presentable and refine our craft and become good at something, so that when we pop into Libra, we can take that polished self, either personally or professionally, and use it to create balance and artistry and beauty and harmony. So the Libra cycle begins, and the first thing that happens is he gets cast in the Broadway play opposite Katharine Hepburn. This is on Broadway. This is a tremendous in the world of acting. Your career basically follows the big break, and this is the big break for him. He's out there. He's doing it. He's having some success. And then by 1978, he's cast as the lead as a relatively unknown at that point in the role of Superman, 1978. And it's funny, one of his quotes in here was about playing Clark Kent. The mild-mannered reporter was no stretch of the imagination for me. Then came Somewhere in Time and Superman 2. And then 83, the Bostonian, Superman 3. So he had some pretty big movies there, and the Superman sequels kept coming. And what was interesting was he turned down the lead for American Gigolo and role in Body Heat and also Mutiny on the Bounty, and stayed with the Superman phenomenon. And finally, Superman 4, which he was not just actor but also involved in the production of, was totally flopped, and went several years after that. He had trouble landing a part for almost 4 years. So that's the gibbous phase. So it's making these adjustments. It reaches the full phase in May of 1990, and at this point, now think about this. He's a Libra sun sign. He's in a Libra cycle. He reaches the full phase. Guess what happens? He gets married. He marries Dana Morosini, and son is born. And then paralyzed in the disseminating phase. In the third quarter phase of the Libra cycle, his biography is published. It's called Still Me. And then in the balsamic phase, he died. I also like to note it's interesting to look at not just the sign of the progressed new moon, but also the degree. And there's a system called Sabian symbols, that there's a symbol that's associated with actually every degree of the zodiac. There's 360 of these, and the Sabian symbol for the progressed new moon in Libra, which is 25 Libra 30. Remember, that's when he began he got in the Broadway play and then Superman. The Sabian symbol is an eagle and a dove changed swiftly into each other. An eagle and a dove changed swiftly into each other. When you think about like Superman, it's like Clark Kent and Superman. And also the thing of like, here's this strapping 6'4" handsome guy, athletic actor, and then from an accident he ends up he's in a wheelchair. So I actually see that symbolically fitting two of those big themes in his life. So the next example I'd like to talk about is the chart of Adolf Hitler, April 20th, 1889, 6:30 p.m., Braunau am Inn. And what's interesting about, just real briefly, touch on his chart, he's born with Sun in the sign of Taurus, Moon in Capricorn, and Libra rising. Sun in Taurus, Moon in Capricorn, Libra rising. He does have Mercury in Aries and a Venus-Mars conjunction in Taurus. I think are very significant, and Saturn in Leo. So he was born, in terms of Sun-Moon phase, over halfway through a Sun-Moon cycle, and he's actually born in the disseminating phase of the Moon. So the cycle that Hitler came in on was an Aries cycle, and from birth to about age 9, he's finishing out this Aries cycle that was already 2/3 through when he was born. So that's the big theme of his life, and that's the big theme of particularly that first 9 years of his life. He's climbing in Aries mountain of experience. And the second cycle, which started around age 9 to age 39, was a Taurus cycle. And then from age 39 until his death, he was in a Gemini cycle. So he's an Aries, Taurus, Gemini in terms of these big 29.5-year cycles of experience. So what I'd like to do is just work through and hit some high points in this. So Hitler was magnetic leader of many of his people and the sole destructor of tens of millions of lives, as a result of World War II. He was the leader of a nation and also the military head. So I'm going to jump ahead past the end of that Aries cycle and into the Taurus cycle in the first quarter phase around age 17, 18. After the death of his father, he left Austria to seek his fortune in Vienna. I think that seeking your fortune sounds like something a Taurus might do. And he was a failure at his art and architecture studies. He did not get admitted to the Academy of Fine Arts, withdrew from his family, wandered, and in that process ended up turning towards fervent German nationalism. Reached the full phase, moved to Munich, ended up serving in World War I in the infantry regiment as a headquarters runner. It's like a messenger. And was wounded in the leg during the war. He was gassed and was decorated for bravery. And during this time, he really turned against the Weimar Republic that was pacifist, and that in his opinion was the cause of his deprivation as well as the deprivation of a lot of the populace. And by the time he reached the disseminating phase, he was appointed by the military as an instructor for political indoctrination and joined the Nazi Party. And then in 1921, which would be third quarter, he was made president of the Nazi Party. So you think about the third quarter as there's manifesting some goals here. And his stated goal, his idea, was actually to overthrow the government. That's where he was headed with this. So in the third quarter, the famous beer hall push, where he tried to regain control of the party. There was a trial, which on the upside gained nationwide attention for his cause, but on the downside landed him in prison. And it's interesting, it went into prison. It was right as the balsamic phase began. While he was in prison, he wrote his famous book Mein Kampf, which was really about social Darwinism. So I want to listen to the ideas coming out of this man at the tail end of a Taurus cycle. This is what he's extracted from his experience in a Taurus cycle, and that's the idea that the struggle for life governs the relationships of both individuals and nations, and relief will come from a plebiscital dictatorship that would fight a relentless war, and in the process conquering living space. This was the idea of Lebensraum, that would make Germany militarily and economically unassailable. So basically, it's like let's annex, let's take over the space around us, and that's what's going to make us safe and strong. Does that sound like something a Taurus sun sign would be interested in? Does that sound like the results, the distillation of a Taurus cycle? Land is going to protect us. Land is going to give us security. So in the end of the balsamic phase, he gets out of prison, tries to rebuild the party. He wins the chairmanship, but he's prohibited from speaking. Then he enters the third mountain to climb, which is Gemini. The new phase begins, and in 1929, listen to this. Here's the big breakthrough. That the German Nationalist Party gives him respectability by helping him campaign against German reparations. You know, the Allies were pretty hard on the Germans as far as making them pay, punishing them for the First World War. And the Nazis make their first substantial showing in national elections. And in the Crescent phase, he's made Chancellor of Germany. So let me go back. So this is he's entered after the Taurus cycle, he's entered this Gemini cycle. What happens when you move from Taurus to Gemini? In Taurus, you develop some sense of what's important, some sense of values. In Gemini, the goal is to spread that all over the place, to tell everybody, to talk to everybody. Let's pass it on. Let's let everybody know. So now he's Chancellor of Germany. He hits the first quarter, which is it's the most active phase of this 29.5-year cycle, and that's where he consolidates his political power. And then he actually annexes in the first quarter phase Austria, then Sudetenland, then part of Czechoslovakia, and Britain, France declare war, and World War II is on. And by the time he gets to the full phase, so this is 1943, Germany's defeated at Stalingrad, Allies take back North Africa, the war was lost, Mussolini's regime collapses, 44 the Allies invade France, and then 45 he commits suicide. So there's this progression of Aries, which is about creating an identity for yourself through challenge, through conflict, Taurus establishing values, and then Gemini spreading them. And I just like one more, also with this chart, I just like to note the Sabian symbols for those 3 new moon degrees. So the new moon that happened before he was born, 10 Aries 57, and this is like his first part of his life, and also I think relates to the whole life. The Sabian symbol for that Aries point is the ruler of a nation. The ruler of a nation. Then he gets to the Taurus part of the cycle, a Red Cross nurse. That's a willingness to go into tough situations, which he did. I mean, he went, served in the army, and was injured. And then the third one, you know, right as the war started getting closer and closer to the war buildup, the Gemini cycle, 8 Gemini 28, the Sabian symbol for that was a quiver filled with arrows. A quiver filled with arrows, which I think those 3 symbols really, to me, strongly connect with how the journey of his life unfolded. So there's one other phenomenon that we noticed as we studied these cycles more deeply, and this really in calculating these secondary progressions, you can start at the person's birth and move forward, but actually you can go backwards to figure out when that progressed new moon happened before. The prenatal progressed new moon is what I call it. And there's a technique in secondary progressions called converse progressions, but this is actually it's a little bit different. So what we did was, for the people in our research group who studied their own charts, they went back and calculated in terms of years, how many years before, what year and what month before they were born, that their progressed prenatal new moon would have happened, and related that and started talking with parents and having conversations. And in the 2 of the cases that we did that, both individuals, there was something very significant that happened in one case with a parent and one case with grandparents that symbolically created a trajectory, events, beliefs, things that happened to that person, that ancestor, that in both cases we could see how that set up a very strong direction and theme that would play into that individual's life of the chart that we were studying. So there's this idea that these the prenatal progressed new moon actually is a way that ties a thread between the experience and the life direction of the persons whose chart it is with what came before them and the people that came before them in their life. That there's this thread of continuity from the self to the parents to the grandparents. And I found this absolutely fascinating. It's a little bit harder to study because there are things that are happening as much as 29 years before you were born. So that's an area for further study, and I encourage people who delve into this cycle to check into that and see when was that and what was happening in the parents and other people in your family that it might have been significant in your life. So just as a way to wrap up, I've been working with this cycle for many years now, and I've found it for most of my clients amazingly valuable as a way to give them a big picture context of where they are in their life and what the big themes are. I've also found that for people under about 30 or 35 that the discussion of the cycle, it really is not as useful because they don't have enough experience under their belt to relate to the cycle's discussion. Here's two examples of actual conversations I've had with clients where talking about this cycle was useful. First example. Client comes in, woman. She's like 50 years old. Has been raised a family. Has basically been focused on home, family, housewife. Being there for her family, taking care of the kids. Running the household. Has been totally, in a way, doing what was needed for the group, kind of giving herself up for the sake of the family and being very successful at it. It was a wonderful marriage and home, and the kids are just, turned out really well. And had been in a Pisces cycle, and had just, in the last few months, that cycle had ended and started an Aries 29.5-year cycle. And what was happening was she was feeling this urge to step out of the role of being the one who is constantly doing for everyone else and wanting to do some things for herself. She wanted to take some classes. She wanted to get a job and a career going. She wanted other people to start doing a lot of things that she did for them, in the family role. And of course, not only did her husband and her kids and even the friends around her, they were a little bit upset by this. They were a little disturbed by this because it's just a totally different thing. And there was a part of her that was like, am I just being selfish? Am I, what's wrong with me? This just doesn't feel right. And I was able to bring in this discussion about that what you're feeling is not just going to be happening this month or this year. This is the theme for the next 29.5 years, that she's successfully done Pisces and done it well, and now it's time for her to grow into the next stage. And that in growing and in changing and in shifting, it'll actually create a space for all the people around her, for them to step up and grow and evolve into the next thing. And it was interesting as I sat there and talked, and I could see that that resonated with her. She connected with it. She felt affirmed, and it was like there wasn't anything in her environment that would support or affirm the feelings that she was having. And so having this astrological perspective gave her confidence, empowered her to really do what she was feeling and be who she was, and really not who she'd been these last 3 decades. That she'd done it well, and now there was a new thing coming in. Second example, a man comes in, and he's in his early 50s, and has been the last 20, almost 3 decades, had worked really hard, had been totally goal-focused, work-focused, business-focused, and had done well, had succeeded, had achieved a lot of his goals. And what had happened was he'd actually stepped away from his work and taken an early retirement, and was basically, for the first time, that he could remember, really didn't have a job. He was taking time off. He was doing vacation. He was doing traveling, spending a lot of time just being quiet and reading and thinking. And there was a part of him that really felt very uncomfortable with that. He kept thinking, like, what is wrong with me? It's like I'm normally working 2 jobs and now I'm not working any, and this feels really funny. And he was kind of worried about had something gone wrong for him or in his life. So we began looking at these cycles and focused on, okay, which cycle's in and what phase of the cycle. And it turned out, just as he had left his job and took this early retirement, he'd entered the balsamic phase of a 29.5-year cycle. And what happens in the balsamic phase is there's a process of letting go of what you've been doing so that you can inwardly process the meaning of that, so that you can extract something from that internally, emotionally, and spiritually. That was really his assignment during this several-year period. And that taking the time to do that would let him, in a very clear and clean way, let the seed form for what was going to come, for the vision for the next 29.5-year cycle. So we had a long conversation about this thing between doing and being and outer and inner, and that he had entered the part of that cycle where this is really about inner work more than outer work, and that he was doing exactly where he was right in step with where his life journey was, and that he was not going to be there for the rest of his life, but there was going to be actually a very, I think it was like a couple more years, and I told him, here's the date when this is going to shift over and a whole new thing is going to come in. And again, this was another case where there really wasn't anything in his environment to support and affirm his sense of what he was doing, even though he was doing it. And again, when I talked to him, I could tell that I could tell by the expression in his eyes that I touched into a truth for him, a truth that, and I was able to support that and encourage him to do, what he came here to do, and to listen to that inner voice, and that this was a preparation for the next cycle to come. So I invite you, if you're an astrology student, to take this system and study it and use it. And if you're just want information, if you're an astrology client, talk to someone who can work with the cycle, or contact me. I really, of everything I've done in astrology, that this has been one of the things that has been the most valuable and meaningful both to me and to my clients. So thank you very much.